All right, this video covers my granular synthesizer, and it gives pretty explicit instructions on how to make it work and how to install it so that students can use it as needed. I will also go through all the functionality, or some of the functionality in this video, basically to get you up and running. There are obviously a lot more buttons and knobs that I won't be covering in this video, but this should get you up and running to start off with. First of all, granular synthesis is a form of sound production that involves taking small fragments of audio files and then playing them in rapid succession or simultaneously. I like to explain this as kind of putting sound through a blender and hearing what comes out of it. These short audio files, samples, are called grains. So this is a sample-based synthesis that takes an audio file and usually in some way splits it up into very small pieces and then plays them back in very rapid succession to create kind of a new texture or a new sound based off of the original. A couple of really important concepts are the understanding of what a millisecond is. As with all pro audio, a millisecond is equal to 1/1000th of a second, or it takes 1,000 milliseconds to equal 1 second that we recognize of time. So most of the measurements we'll use for the granular synthesizer are based off of milliseconds in length. To start off with the most important concepts relating to granular synthesis and the three most important parameters that you'll be using to make the granulator work are the grain length, which is the length of the grain in milliseconds, the actual how long the sound lasts, the grain rate, which is the rate at which grains are sounded. So 10 sounds per second, 5 sounds per second, 5,000 sounds per second. These are the possibilities. And then the last one is the grain transposition, which is essentially the pitch of the grain. And in this case, in classic transposition, pitch and speed are linked together. So the lower the pitch is, the longer the sound is, and lower and slower in general is the concept. And then the higher the pitch is, the shorter the sample gets, just like a record player playing at slower speeds. So in terms of installation of this, you're going to run into this problem on both Mac and PC. Because I developed this software and made it, again, it will not just open on a computer because the computers don't recognize the developer. It's not a recognized developer source. So on a Mac, when you try to launch this application, you're going to get this error, which basically says that, and I just picked this off of YouTube, so it's going to say actually Granulator Duo cannot be opened because it is from an unidentified developer. So the way you solve this problem is you go to the security preferences, and on a Mac or on a Mac, it's up to the Apple at the top. Go to System Preferences, and under System Preferences, you're going to go over to Security and Privacy, and I'm going to click on this. And mine right now doesn't show it because I haven't done this. But after I tried to launch it for the first time, I would get this error, which you do have to do. You have to try and launch it first, and then the error pops up. Then you'll see underneath here where it says allow apps downloaded from, it will say, would you like to open this anyways? Okay, and you'll end up with this screen like this, and it will say instead, of course, Granulator Duo was blocked from opening because it is not from an identified developer. Open anyways. So you want to click this button that says open anyways, and that basically opens up Granulator Duo and makes it work. And from then on, it will work on any machine. It'll work on your machine, I mean, because you're basically telling the computer, open this anyways, right? So again, under security and privacy settings, after you've tried to launch it for the first time, which I can't stress enough, you just go straight here. It will not be listed until you've tried to open it once. And then down here at the bottom, it's going to say Granulator Duo was blocked from opening because it is not an identified developer, okay? So on the PC side, when you download Granulator Duo, you have to extract it first. And the extraction looks like this. When you download it first, it'll look like this. And when you try and launch granulatorduo.exe, you will first have to extract the project. So this will pop up and it'll say, do you want to extract it? Yes, I want to extract all. And then you set the file destination, extract. And once that's done, you will try and launch the .exe file. And when you do, this will pop up for PCs. Windows Defender Smart Screen prevented an unrecognized app from starting. Running this app may put your PC at risk. So once again, the PC doesn't recognize me as a developer or a company that makes software. And so it's trying to protect you from malware, of course, and stuff like that. So what I have to do is hit this button that says more information, more info, right? And then what will pop up will be this little thing. And then down here, you'll click this button that says run anyways, okay? And that will bypass the same problem and then it will work from then on out, okay? So I sent you a Google Drive link and you can see both of the apps are in there. And once again, the Windows version says windows.zip. The Mac version just says Granulator Duo.zip, okay? So you pick the one you want and they're exactly the same. They work exactly the same way once they're launched, okay? And again, these are standalone applications. They do not need Macs to work. They just work on their own, okay? So let's talk about the Granulator. A couple things to set up first. As we know with every application, the computer first has to be told, or the program has to be set up for the audio to work. So what I need to do is go down to this button that says configure DSP, and that's going to configure my ins and outs, right? My ins and outs for the program. So I click on configure DSP. It pulls up this window here. And now I can set my inputs and outputs. Right now, I'm using my Mac Pro microphone, and then my output is Soundflower because that's the way I'm recording. You would choose like your main speakers here or your headphone jack, depending on what your computer is, and go from there. Now, a couple other things I really recommend you do. Turn on Scheduler in Overdrive and Audio Interrupt. You want to turn these two buttons on. Once you turn on Scheduler in Overdrive is on, then you're going to click the next one, which is Audio Interrupt is on. What this does is it prioritizes rhythm in the computer, in the program, so that it doesn't make rhythmic errors and it just makes it smoother. It'll basically like slow down other processes to make the Granulator flow and work functionally more like smoothly, okay? So, getting to how this works then, first of all, I have to turn on the Granulator once I have configured the DSP, and I turn on the Granulator right here at the bottom with the speaker button, okay? So when I turn on the speaker, it'll turn bright pink, and that means it's on, and it's running, and is now working as the software is intended. These two on and off switches up here, they turn on the individual granulators, right? They do not turn on the audio interface, which is what this big button does at the bottom. Not to mention too that these sliders on the left here, the left and right of the on button, those are for the main volume of the Granulator, okay? And they make it work. So what I can do now is talk about the basic functionality of the Granulator, okay? So that you will need to do your assignment. So again, as I mentioned at the beginning, the three most important factors about granular synthesis are the grain length, which is written here, right? This little box. The grain rate, which is in this box. And then the last one is the transposition, which is over here, okay? Now, by default, when you open this, the MIDI keyboard is going to be turned on. You probably actually don't want that turned on. Unless you have a MIDI keyboard, it's not going to actually do anything. So you would want to click this and close it, and it's going to pull up the other parameter interface that you can use. So let's first talk about grain rate and grain length. As we talked about in class today, they are related, okay? So again, the grain length is how long the actual grains are. And all three of these sliders have several different ways of functioning. First of all, if I just click once in here, it's going to set the grain to a specific length, Okay, let me turn on number 1 here. And I'm also going to mute this so it doesn't make sound. But you can see that my grain length is set to 460 milliseconds, which again is almost a half a second, right? Half a second would be 500. So if I click one time, it will just pick that moment. And you know, you have to play around with this to get the number you're looking for, if you're looking for a specific number. If I want it to randomize within a range, I click and drag and make a range. And now you can see every grain is granulating down to, I think, 10 milliseconds in length. And it's granulating within that range. Every time it's a randomization of that number, okay? So the grain rate then is similar. If I click on the grain rate, it will change, right? And if I go down, it's going to get faster and faster. And you can see fast is over here, slow is over here. So if I click way out here, the maximum length is 3,000 milliseconds, which again is basically 3 seconds. So every 3 seconds there's a grain. Not really granular synthesis at that speed, very slow. But nevertheless, there it is. So if I want to set a range, I can push this out like this. And you can see now the speed is going to change regularly, right? I think it's set to every 2 seconds. It will randomize inside this rate. So, and that will change the sound, of course, okay? So, and as someone asked in class, a really good question about the relationship to grain rate and length, right? The longer the rate is, relation to the grain, the more overlap or less overlap there will be. So if the grain rate, for instance, is 158 and the length is less than that, there will be no overlap of any notes. In fact, there will be space between them, right? And similarly, if I do this way, if I go this way and the grain rate is 158 and the length is almost 400, that means there's going to be overlap of notes, okay? And let me show you what I mean by this. I have a little demo that I made in Logic just as a visualizer. So here we have a bunch of notes in Logic, right? And if I zoom out here, imagine these in time, right? I'm not going to play this, it's random notes, but this is what a granulator does. So if the rate is how often these notes are sounding, and if they're really short, you can see there's no overlap of any of these notes, right? They're all separated by space of no sound. But as I increase the length of these and push them further and further and further out in length, they start to overlap, right? And as I mentioned, this will dramatically increase the volume sometimes of the sound, because now suddenly I have at one moment 7 different sounds playing at the same time, right? And so, or here, for instance, where I have maybe 10 playing at the same time. So you can see how grain rate and length are related. If I suddenly go beyond the length of the sound or the rate, then the sound can multiply quickly and get loud. Now again, the granulator is set to only play 64 notes at a time, I believe. It might be 128, I can't remember. But in general, that's just something to keep in mind, that you want to maintain a variation between your length and your rate. Now, it doesn't mean they can't overlap. Overlapping can be very effective, actually, to creating a soft, kind of nice, cohesive pad. If you do something like this, you're going to end up with more of a mix of sounds, because you have a nice blend of notes, right? Notes are blending together, as opposed to this sound. Is going to be way more what's called, I would consider, pointillist, because all the notes are going to be individual and separate, okay? So, and this is very easy to demonstrate with any sound. Right now I have this fly sound in here, but let me actually go into samples and grab something a little more musical. Let me just grab a little guitar sample, something acoustic. We'll grab something dry. Now this is a little guitar loop that sounds like this, actually. Okay, So what's going to happen is the granulator is going to choose anywhere that I have in here, select it. So all I'm doing is clicking and dragging here. It's going to choose inside here and randomize those notes. So let's hear how this sounds. Okay. Now, right now, let me put this back to normal speed. Oh, this is not sounding good, and I guarantee you it's because the computer... Let me try and close Logic. That might help. The computer is struggling to do all the things I'm doing right now. Ah, that's better. Because I'm recording the audio while I'm making a video, while I'm playing the granulator. Okay? So, that's one thing to know about the granulator too. It can be pretty CPU taxing, alright? Because the granulator is basically doing some high intensive sounds all at once. It can be playing many, many granulations at a time. And if I go to options and look at the audio status, I can actually see how much the CPU is powering. That's a lot of CPU, right? But again, the problem is that the computer is a little bit overloaded with sounds. So one way of solving this actually is to, if I make the grains shorter and I make the length longer, this should slow down the CPU usage a little bit. It can help if you're getting issues with sound clipping like that a little bit, right? And those of you with bad computers or old computers, you might struggle a little bit to use this. You might have been just wanting to use it in the lab, okay? And it'll open in the lab just like it does here. So let's listen to this now again. So you can hear right now, my grain length and my grain rate are about the same, okay? But if my grain rate gets quicker, now there's no overlap. All right, let me turn the reverb and delay off. So you can hear what the granulator is really doing now. It's playing a single sample that's 129 milliseconds in length, and it's playing them every 224 milliseconds, okay? Now if I speed this up, listen to what happens. Okay? Also, conversely, if I click in here one time over here, it's going to play one moment over and over and over very fast. Okay? And if I lengthen this, see what it does? It kind of draws out that sound and makes it long, which actually can be really cool, especially when I use the keyboard. Because I can basically make a sound longer. Now if I add some reverb in there and some delay, I can end up with a really nice pad. Turn the keyboard back on. Okay. So anyway, so there's lots of cool stuff going on here, and you know, you just need to play around with your grain rate and length to kind of create the sound you're looking for. Now, I can't stress enough that this just takes time to get good at. It takes time to practice and kind of get comfortable with it. You know, naturally, the default sound of the granulator is kind of like a vacuum cleaner. Like it takes a little time to get used to making cool things with it. I'm going to talk about it on Wednesday, explain it some more to hopefully make it work better for you. So just a couple other parameters that you should know about. Again, our pitch, right? So transposition is how long, how quickly the sounds are playing, and how much they're changing over, or how quickly, sorry, but really the pitch transposition, okay? Now, if I choose something like chromatic, this is literally just going to play any possible note that is on the piano, right? And it's going to grant, if I make a range, it's going to play those notes inside that range. Hear this? Okay? So, and I really recommend you use the reverb and delay because it helps kind of soften the entire sound and kind of mix it together, okay? Which can make a really cool sound. There's also a filter over here you can play around with. I'm not going to explain it, but you could explain. These are some presets you can click on and see what they do. You can also click on this and grab it, move it over. So you could try out that if you were interested in trying to get some different sound. And so other than that, like if I want to choose like random frequencies, This literally will choose any random frequency, many notes beyond what's on the keyboard or the piano, right? But a random note. So if I play this again, okay. So one other thing too I want to point out is this awesome thing with pan, man. I love this panner. I'm actually quite proud of this. Like if manual is turned on, that means I can turn it left or right, okay? If LFO is on, it's going to do what's called low frequency oscillating, all right? Which is, low frequency oscillating means that it oscillates back and forth at a slow speed, okay? And then I can also choose random, and this will randomize the pan. Literally, it's just going to randomly kind of move and go from one value to another. There's a randomizing parameter going on, okay, which is pretty cool. My favorite, though, is scatter. And what scatter does, literally every single grain is being sent to a different speaker or a different place in the stereo field. Listen to this. So it's literally just kind of randomizing every single sound. And this can be really cool with certain types of sounds. Okay. So you can end up with really cool mixture, but so if I go back to manual, put it in the middle. So anyway, so you end up with some neat stuff with the granulator. The last thing, so this, I don't want to make this too long, so I want to just talk about the last thing I want to talk about is using to record it, right? So again, I want to mention briefly too, there are two of these, number 1 and number 2, and then they link together, and I'm going to talk about this on Wednesday, but you can have 2 simultaneous sounds at once, right? Now again, this gets you into CPU issues, right? Remember that the computer has a certain CPU limit. So if I turn 2 of these on at once, it's struggling because I'm recording video and audio at the same time. You'll have better results than that. But I can basically run 2 granulators at the same time, okay? And that's the point of the one down here. You'll notice it's identical to the one at the top. So they're the same thing. I can just have 2 at once, all right? Now, to record this, all right, one thing you have to be really careful of, these are your main outputs. So if something's clipping, let me turn number 1 back on again. This is the meter you need to pay attention to right here, okay? So I can turn this up to get more sound from it, okay? And let me actually mention one more quick thing before I go on to that. You have to be really, just a little bit of a warning, okay? If you add an audio file that has a lot of variation in it, okay? Now let me show you what I mean. Let's grab this. Yeah, this should work. So notice in this audio file, you guys, there are all kinds of different volume levels, okay? There are loud moments like here, which would be really hard to select, but maybe I got it there. And then there are really quiet moments like right here, right? Well, the granulator is observing that volume level, okay? So if you, for instance, suddenly crank up the volume or land the granulator on a very loud moment, it will get loud, right? Because suddenly it's based off of that single audio file moment. In fact, let me see. This is a better audio file, right? So listen to this granulator here. Let's listen to the granulation here. Unmute it. It's pretty quiet, right? Listen to what happens when I change here. Okay? And that's simply because there's more signal at this place, right? So I have to be careful of that when I'm recording and also just listening. You don't want to hurt your ears. You know, I could turn this up over here. Like, man, it's really quiet. I'm not hearing this very loud. I'm going to turn it up a bunch. And then I move the playhead here. And suddenly it's way louder, right? So just be aware of that. If you have, for instance, all of this selected, then you'll get some loud and some quiet because, again, remember, it's randomizing inside this audio file over and over. So that's actually a pretty cool sound, but you get the idea, right? Turn scatter on. Okay, so the last thing then, recording. So to record the sound, I have to hit save. I can't stress this enough. Save first. Okay, this is the record button for recording the sounds. And again, the only way to get this sound into Logic is to make a recording of it and move it into Logic. So the first thing I do is I hit save. All right, I'm going to hit save. It's going to pull up a dialog box. And it's saying, where do you want to save this? And I'm going to say, I want to save it on the desktop or wherever you want to save it. You pick somewhere. Then I'm going to call this recording 1. Okay. I'm going to say, oh, save. So it's basically allocated space on the hard drive now to save this. As soon as I hit record now, it's now recording. And if I unmute this, I am now writing an audio file that's recording this sound. Okay? I hit record again to finish the recording process. I cannot stress this enough. If you do not finish the recording process, it will not save and allocate and finish the file, and it won't work. So if you don't stop the recording, the file does not get completed and it won't work. But now on my desktop, I should have an audio file called recording 1. And if I pull this up into an audio program like Amadeus, there it is. Okay. So anyways, that is it. This is how the Granulator works. And I can't stress enough watching this video just to, get a refresher, or if you have any questions, everything should be answered. You should be able to get this up and running by watching this video. If you have any questions, please email me, but we will cover this on Wednesday as well. Okay.